What's up, everybody? On our channel we've done a lot of videos about homeless people, but today I'm going to do a video for homeless people. This is my personal opinion about how I would personally handle some of these situations. I am not a lawyer and this is not legal advice, but within the state of Florida we've been doing documentaries about homeless people, and we've discovered that many times the mode of operation of law enforcement violates the rights of homeless people. And while this video is for entertainment purposes because I'm not a lawyer, it should give you a few ideas on where you can start to look for your rights when you encounter law enforcement. The first thing you should know that despite your anger and frustration at the situation you're in with homelessness, you should always be respectful and courteous to law enforcement, even when they are not being respectful and courteous to you. Despite the fact they carry a badge, law enforcement officers are rarely the source of the reason you're not wanted somewhere. Many times it's a business owner or somebody who makes a complaint anonymously. Somebody may simply drive past you, see you, and make a complaint to law enforcement because they don't want to see you there. Police officers have to carry out the ordinances in place by cities, mayor's offices, and city councils. And many times it's not their personal decision to go after you, but it's the decision of those people above them. We're going to start off with a simple law enforcement encounter application, since this is most likely the situation you're most concerned about. Law enforcement approaching you and telling you that you're trespassing on private property. And keep in mind that I can educate you on techniques that you could likely use, but this will not prevent police officers who have more authority than a homeless person from disobeying the law or from acting improperly. Many of the techniques that law enforcement is using in Florida to counter homelessness are methods of intimidation, proclaiming that you have violated laws that you haven't violated, or making it seem like what you're doing is highly illegal when it's really a right you have. And when you are dealing with a police officer as a homeless person, who's going to prosecute a police officer? You have the chance to lose every single time, and when it's your word against the word of a police officer, more often than not, you the homeless person are going to lose. So despite the fact that on this video we're going to go over your rights as a homeless person, the actual effectiveness of your rights being respected by law enforcement are not going to be guaranteed. And this is where you have to be very careful, because you have to assert your rights and somewhat intimidate the police officer, not in a physical violence type of way, but you have to intimidate them and letting them know that you don't have a problem legally escalating situations, which is possibly the last thing you want to do as a homeless person, considering that you don't have a lot of ground to stand on yourself. A lot of judgment has to be taken on your part whether an encounter with a police officer merits any further action on your part, or if it's something worth overlooking. In the case that you're sitting on property that's not yours and a police officer approaches you, in theory, you have the right to demand certain things from that police officer. You can carry a notebook and a pencil on your property, very affordable to obtain. You should ask the police officer the date and write it down in front of them, their badge number, their name, and the specific law enforcement agency that they work for. Keep in mind that a police officer can turn a simple encounter with you into a resisting arrest charge, even when you've done absolutely nothing, and that's why it's very important for you to be courteous, respectful, and that your body language is not threatening. This may include being on the ground, talking in a soft voice, and not making any type of hand gestures if not necessary. Because you are not driving a vehicle, you do not have to identify yourself. You do not have to explain why you are in a public place. And really, you should be asking the officer more questions than he's asking you. And those questions should include the date, their name, their badge number, the agency they work for. And I know this may sound kind of counterproductive, but if the police officer is going to issue you a warning, you're going to want them to issue it on paper. That means that they'll notarize it on their computer. And while this may be the last thing that you as a homeless person want, if they're going to issue you a warning, it cannot be verbal. It has to be written. You have to have a case or a citation number, even if it's a warning. The police officer may not want to do that for some reason. Your goal is to document every interaction that you have with law enforcement from now moving forward so that you can create an opportunity to sue the agency. And again, it's the agency that you're going to sue, not the particular police officer. So catching situations or catching feelings or bad sentiments between you and a police officer is going to do nothing to help your case. And I would even go as far as asking the police officer the time he arrives and the time that he departs so that you can also have how much time this interaction took. If you have a cell phone, you can escalate the situation by recording the encounter. Instead of holding your phone upright, if your phone is able to record sideways, it is highly advisable for you to record sideways. This lets the police officer know that you have the intention to upload the video to the internet on a platform like YouTube, which is definitely the last thing this police officer wants. If he does violate your rights and you record it and upload it to the internet, this is really a deterrent that most police officers are going to want no part of, and if the situation merits him walking away, this will be a good opportunity for the police officer to back off. If the police officer gets emotional or heated, he could easily make a mistake, and now that mistake is on video. Just keep in mind that when you pull out that camera and start recording, that you are now being perceived as a hostile person, and your demeanor, your talking, everything that you do from that point forward has to be absolutely perfected, because he's going to take you pulling out the camera as an act of aggression. I would even go as far as telling the police officer that your lawyer has advised you to record all interactions with law enforcement and that it's not up to you, it's what you've been instructed to do by your lawyer. If you have a Gmail account, it automatically comes with a YouTube channel. However, I would advise you not to publish the video. You can upload videos to YouTube, but you don't have to publish them and make them private. This is in case somebody steals your phone or you go to jail for a period of time. When you get back out, or if you lose your phone or something happens, that video is saved to your Gmail account and on your YouTube channel, and that video will not be lost even if you lose your phone. If you do decide to record, keep in mind that regardless of your demeanor, the law enforcement officer may take this as a very hostile move on your part. In many jurisdictions, the specific details of what happens doesn't even matter when you go to court. It's your word, a homeless person, versus the word of an employee of the state. They're not going to defend you. And many times when you go to court, even with a lawyer defending you, the specific details of the case do not even come into question. If the police officer wants to know why you're recording, you can just simply say it's for personal record because your lawyer has advised you to do so. This is very likely not something the police officer is going to interrogate anymore. If he's able to get out of the situation, chances are he will. It's just not the type of attention they want. And keep in mind, if you don't have a cell phone, you can always ask a friend to record for you. Since you're not going to keep the video, you're going to upload it to your Gmail account. Even if an interaction seems small or insignificant now, if you continue to have individual officers bother you or agencies, it could be part of a larger case in the future. So it's important for you to document each interaction as much as possible. And let's be understanding that there's no reason for a police officer or an agency to contact you constantly if you're not doing anything illegal. Currently, in the state of Florida, many people and law enforcement agencies, as well as property owners, are posting up do not enter construction site signs, which makes trespassing a felony. However, these properties are not really construction sites because they have not pulled permits. However, despite the fact the sign does not hold any legal weight, I would strongly advise you to not enter these areas. What you can do is, if you're able to record the interaction with police officers, you can dispute whether the sign's legitimate or not, which would include, if it is a construction site, that the city portal or that the city permit website has issued a permit for the start of a job. Sometimes this is called a notice of commencement. The notice of commencement, or NOC, would suggest that the city or county or property owner has pulled permits to start a building process. If there isn't a permit pulled, it's usually not a construction site. Many times, law enforcement or cities and counties and municipalities will make up a sign that says something that has no legal power. And you, the homeless person, they're going to assume that you don't know the laws to be able to establish whether a sign actually has legal validation or not. You can write anything on a piece of paper, but will it stand up in court? However, if it's a felony charge, I would almost say it's probably not worth trying to find out. But if you're not afraid of getting into that gray zone of the law, you can definitely question whether it really is legitimately a construction site. Just because they bring out a bulldozer or a dumpster, that doesn't make it a construction site. In the state of Florida, for it to be a construction site means that the person who owns the property has pulled a permit for a structure. Most of the time, when you're being evicted from land, whether it's city land, county land, private property, they really need to get a warrant. I've had a lot of people tell me that when the police officers show up to an empty lot, they tell them that they have to leave within an hour or a certain time period, and these police officers are breaking a lot of laws. For one, the only way they can have you leave that property legally is with a court-ordered warrant. If the police officer is an agent for the person who owns the property, he can ask you to leave the property or try to trespass you. But this police officer needs to know the name of the person who owns the property, which means that you also need to know that. You can obtain that by going to the property appraiser website for the Florida county that you live in. And really, you should know every single piece of land that you're sleeping in. Everywhere that you're going to sleep as a homeless person, you should know who owns that property, and you can obtain that information from the county property appraiser. Let's say you live in Lee County, Florida. You look up the Lee County property appraiser, you put in the address, or you can get a map, and you find out who owns that piece of land. So when a police officer approaches you and says you're trespassing, your next question should always be, who owns this property? And that police officer, if he really has the legitimate right to vacate you, should know the name of the person who owns that property. Then he should have a method of contacting that person, like an email address or a phone number, and you have the right then and there to communicate with that person and see if that person is legitimately authorizing this police officer to ask you not to be there. Destruction of property without a warrant is illegal. The police officer cannot cut your tent without a court-ordered warrant. If in fact the police officer wants to take your tent, he has to store it or tow it to a private place. They don't have the right to make you leave it on somebody else's property or to destroy it. The legal method is that they have to store it. Now, I have seen counties in Florida that will actually store your things for you in large garbage cans because the homeless people in those counties have learned their rights. So let's say you are at your homeless camp and a police officer says he's going to arrest you. Well, you have to tell the police officer, these are all my possessions, my tent, my wood, my dog. Everything that you see here is my possession, and I cannot dump it by leaving it here. It means if you're going to arrest me, my bicycle, every possession that I have, you have to store it. And again, you're a homeless person and they're a cop, so your rights likely are not going to be respected. I'm telling you what your rights in theory should be, but the fact that they are materially going to respect your rights is probably very unlikely. But the more you know your rights, the more complicated you can make their job, the less likely they're going to be to arrest you for something insignificant or a trumped up charge. Law enforcement has the right to remove your property, but they don't have the right to destroy it. You should also know the difference between a law enforcement officer suspecting that you're trespassing and a law enforcement officer having evidence. Evidence and suspicion are two totally different things. Who the crap told you that I can't be here? How do you know that I don't own this building? Who owns this building? Do you know who owns this building? Do you have a contact number for the person who knows? You don't know anything. You suspect, your suspicion doesn't mean anything. Do you have evidence that I'm breaking the law? If you don't have a case. And the officer doesn't have a reason to detain you or do anything based off of suspicion. Suspicion means nothing. Evidence means everything. Evidence means who owns this land, what contact number do you have for this person, and what order are they giving you particularly to be an authorized agent to ask me not to be here. And even if they get the owner on the phone, at that point, I would tell them to go get a warrant because they still don't have any legal framework to go after you. And again, I can suggest to you all these options, but in reality, most of the time your rights are going to be violated. That's where you grab a phone, try to document it, and if they really do violate your laws and you're able to get evidence that they violated your rights, you can take that up as a lawsuit against the agency. And remember, you're going after the agency for a lawsuit. The particular officer that's going out there, he's a nobody. Okay, so if you don't like him or he doesn't like you, that's all irrelevant. You continue being respectful with that officer. You don't care about him. He's insignificant. This is you versus the agency, so you can have a legal case. If you start being belligerent and disrespectful and arguing with the police officer, you're not helping yourself in one bit. Your words, your actions are irrelevant. It's a lawyer who's going to analyze the video of the officer's behavior, and that's where the case is at. So what you say, what you tell a police officer, none of that matters. It's what the other party's doing that's going to matter. They send a police officer out there who's not familiar with the law, doesn't know what he's doing, does or says something wrong. You now have a legal case. Could be enough money to get you out of homelessness, get you back into an apartment, get your life together. You know, and sadly with these cases, even lying to you, a police officer lying to you is not a crime. Many times the police officers will lie to you. They will say that they have contact with somebody. They will say that they have a warrant. They will say that you're trespassing. None of it's true. I mean, they even post up signs that are not true. So the police agency or the officers lying to you is not outside of the realm of things you're going to have to deal with. It's going to be up to you to know, one, if it's worth going up against their lie and calling them for it. And in most cases, you just have a lot to lose. And also identifying, are they really going to build something here? Is there a legitimate reason why we have to leave this land? Like, are they really going to bring a crew out here to work? If that's the case, it may be time for you to move on and go somewhere else. But if the police officers are going onto private property, they don't own that property. The agency doesn't own that property. They don't have any right to go on somebody's private property and ask them who's there or why or what they're doing unless the property owner is asking. And I've been a property owner and I've made complaints about properties and they haven't done anything about it. So it's interesting how now all of a sudden they're volunteering to evict homeless people from properties when there's no warrant and no legal ground for them to do it. Yet they want to act like there is a legal ground when there's no real demand from a property owner to have that done. And that is where police officers are going against even common sense. They don't own that property to come and dictate what happens on it. Many times it's the city council members, it's a developer who's building something nearby, and then they want to make the law enforcement get rid of you, the homeless person, but there's no real legal avenue to do it. I've had situations where I have video evidence of somebody burglarizing a property that I've owned. I've known who the person committing the crime is, and law enforcement officers refuse to make an arrest simply because they don't want to. But now all of a sudden, when it comes to homeless people, they're volunteering to go protect people's properties who they don't even know who owns the land. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. When I worked in Miami, we actually had a homeless person who lived on the property, and we had an agreement with him where he was like our overnight security. So you can actually get a contract. Like, you can go up to the guy at the Circle K and be like, hey man, let me sleep on your front porch at night, and I have a phone here with me, and if anything happens to your store, I'll make a complaint. If it's a high crime neighborhood, a lot of business owners might take you up on that. Of course, the Circle K is not going to do that, but a small business owner, that may actually be a great incentive for him to know that you're there at night and you're going to keep an eye out on the property. That probably isn't going to fly with a big company like a car dealership, but if it's a small dealership, if it's a mom and pop place and they're having a lot of crime concerns, and you have your appearance right and your game right, you go, hey man, let me sleep on your front porch overnight and I'll make sure that nobody comes on your property. I got a phone right here, whatever. And keep in mind that a police officer cannot trespass you. Only a property owner can trespass you unless you're within a particular city that has a specific ordinance that says otherwise. It really wouldn't be a bad idea for you to learn every city ordinance of the place where you live. Maybe they'll give you a hard copy or there's a website where you can get it. But if you know every single city ordinance, you may be able to find loopholes or areas that are not covered by those laws, and better be able to identify the areas that are not covered by these laws, and you can have some type of legal immunity somewhere. I would even ask the police officers that are detaining you or trying to talk to you and say, hey, do you have a list of ordinances? Where are these rules and ordinances that you have to go by? Show me in black and white paperwork, print it out, get me a handbook, get as much information as possible so you can start to identify the areas where you may be immune to the law. Keep in mind, you're homeless. So if you're smart, if you were lawyer smart, you wouldn't be on the streets. You would be a lawyer's office. So a lot of times police officers, when they deal with homeless people, they almost feel like they're, the experiences that I've talked to from homeless people is that when they deal with law enforcement, the law enforcement officers, they become enraged in ways that they wouldn't do with me, let's say. So many police officers, when they deal with homeless people, they really do have an inferiority complex, and they feel that they can kind of subject you to them because you're homeless and they're a police officer. But they wouldn't treat me, a regular civilian, that way, because it would become a complication for them. So keep in mind that many officers are going to treat you, a homeless person, very different than they're going to treat somebody else. Many times you're dealing with somebody who's going to lie to you. They're going to lie about ordinances. They're going to lie about everything they can. They're not going to give you straight up a package. So play the idiot card. Like, oh, I can't be here. What ordinance is that? Let me find what ordinance. What's the number of that ordinance? I got my paper and pen right here. Let me just write that down so I can look it up. Play the idiot card, because if you play the smart card, chances are you're not going to win through that avenue. But play the idiot card. Like, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. Can you find me the statute, the ordinance? Ask questions, demand answers, even if it makes you look stupider than what you are, rather than acting like you're smarter than you are. These are people that are setting out to violate your rights, which goes to show that even though they don't have the right to evict you, they're going to evict you. And if you get in the way of their plans, they may actually trump up a charge and say you're resisting arrest, or you threaten them, and they actually can escalate crap and get you in more trouble than what you would ever hope to be in. So that's really the danger, is that you're dealing with somebody who, one, is trying to take away your rights, and two, you have absolutely no credibility as a homeless person going up against a police officer in a court of law, so your rights don't exist to begin with. If you really believe, and you have to be careful with this, if you really believe that the police officer doesn't have the right to arrest you, Tell them, arrest me then. Take me in right now. I'll walk over there myself. There's something called qualified immunity, and you can actually sue them for arresting you inappropriately. So if you really think that the person trying to arrest you doesn't have the right to arrest you, volunteer to arrest me then. Okay, if you're going to trespass me, go ahead, arrest me. Let's go right now. And if they actually do it, you may actually have a lawsuit if they arrest you on grounds that are not really valid. You eventually have to stop running and say, you know what? If you're going to arrest me, if you really have the right to arrest me, go ahead and arrest me. Because if not, they're going to keep playing these games with you, okay? If they post up a sign that has no legal entity power, it's just a sign that's there to intimidate you and scare you, and you run off. They're going to keep doing that over and over to you again. Maybe it's time to impose yourself. So instead of getting chased out of one place and pushed to the next, and every time they're going to use illegal methods, taking away your rights, lying to you, posting up signs that don't have any real legal power, intimidation and fear, you're going to keep running forever. Go on the property appraiser, find a piece of land that's owned by a Chinese company, plant yourself there, and when they show up and tell you I'm going to trespass you, put your hands out in front of them and say, put the handcuffs on me right now. Let me see. Because they're going to keep playing these games with you. If they're lying to you, intimidating you, posting up signs that aren't real and doing all these things, eventually you have to say, you know what? I'm going to arrest myself. With no disrespect. You're tired of it. You're imposing yourself. And you let them know, you arrest me, and when I get out of jail, I'm going to come back here again. And I don't care. And get arrested 10 times over at the same place. And then eventually, they're going to say, wow, this is not really the battle we want to fight, because you too can impose yourself. They impose themselves. You as a homeless person have all the time in the world. You may have to come to the crossroads of deciding whether you're going to keep running and you're going to keep being lied to and keep having your rights taken away, or if you're going to find a piece of land owned by somebody in China, implant yourself there, and when they come, pretty much sit down in the back seat of the car yourself and don't let them back out. No, you were going to arrest me. You ain't getting out of this now. This was your idea. We're going now, and we're going to do this 20 times over because I like this piece of land right here. Now, if you are being a public nuisance, you can definitely be trespassed or arrested for that. If you have excessive garbage, if you have a barking dog, if there's just something about what the crap you're doing that becomes a public nuisance, you can definitely be arrested for that category as well. So you have to make sure that how you're going about yourself is appropriate. You have a bicycle with a little trailer behind it, and you can quickly move from point A to point B, you can save yourself a lot of trouble. But if you're one of those people that has like an entire encampment full of garbage and needles everywhere, what the crap do you think is going to happen? If you're being a public nuisance, you're littering, you're leaving needles behind and crap like that, yeah, of course the law enforcement is going to be mad at you. You spend your time panhandling and hanging out outside the Circle K, yeah, you're making yourself a public nuisance, so definitely you're going to get heat for that. So if you're bringing the attention to yourself by having a messy camp or, whatever the crap you got going on, that's just a public nuisance. You don't have to be a public nuisance to be homeless. You can literally have a bicycle with a trailer behind it, and if one spot gets too hot, ride 3 miles down the road where it's not. So a lot of times you can bring a lot of heat to yourself by the way you carry yourself, how much debris you have, how much time you spend hanging out outside the Circle K with 5 of your buddies could become a public nuisance. And even if you're caught by a police officer, let's say going to a business to grab water, you can tell a police officer, hey, I don't want to become a public nuisance. I want to wash my hair and make sure that I don't smell bad because I don't want to become a public nuisance. So, if you're trying to keep it low key, if you're trying to be as professional about your situation as possible, many times what police officers are doing isn't legally wrong, but it's morally wrong. So you have to grab a scale and say, morally wrong, legally wrong. Sometimes a police officer can be doing something that's legally within his power, but it's morally wrong because somebody is elderly or they have a health problem. So there's a morality to everything. Police officer tells you to leave, ask them, where can I go? No, I want you to be specific. You're telling me to leave. Tell me where to go. I'll go wherever. Where do you think I should go? Give me a good suggestion. You're telling me to leave. No, you're the one who wants me to leave. You got to tell me where to go. So There's a legal aspect and then there's a moral aspect. And if the police officers are not acting within a moral fashion, then maybe you do need to get arrested. Maybe you do need to make things hard for them. But keep in mind, are you a registered offender? Are you an addict? Because all that influences the morality of the situation. So we don't treat addicts and lazy people the same way we treat somebody who has a disability. So now a police officer approaches you and you're on SSI. I'd have it in my pocket. I'd bring out the SSI food stamp card. Be like, hey, see this right here? I'm disabled. You're going to come and tell an old disabled lady to move? There's a moral aspect and there's a legal aspect. And sometimes you may not win by the legal avenue, but you can win by the moral avenue. And that also affects who you are, how you're behaving, and what your criminal past has been. So understand the morality of it. Hey, give me a drug test. I'm clean right now. Give me a drug test. I want you to give me a drug test. Can you take me in right now and do a sobriety test, do a drug test? I want you to know that I'm sober. I want you to know that I'm disabled. This is not a legal thing. This is a moral thing. When you try to encroach on my rights, you're not doing a legal thing. You're doing a moral thing that's wrong. A lot of times police officers know that what they're trying to go about doing, they don't have a legal avenue to do it. So they go around the material physical evidence. A piece of land owned by a developer that's in China or something, or an investor that's in China, they bought that land so they could take a loan against it to buy another piece of land, okay? So really, when you look at a property like that, what is the intent of that property holder? Like, if you're outside of an abandoned building that's graffitied out and it's been burnt out for 5 years, what's the intent of this property owner? Why doesn't this person fix this building? Let's say you're in front of a burnt out, graffitied out building and the police officer says, hey, you're trespassing. You say, well, what's the intent of the person that owns this building? If it's vacant and it's in an urban area with a lot of homeless people, what's their intent? This building, they're not going to reopen this store. This building is going to be demolished. So you also have to keep in mind the intent of the person who owns the property. If it's an investor in China and you're littering all over the place, hey, you might tell a police officer, you know what? This is a Chinese investor. You know what? They're speculating on our real estate market, and that's why Americans are homeless. So the intent of the property owner is also a huge thing that you have to keep in mind. If it's a Circle K in a bad neighborhood, then their intent is probably to attract a bunch of homeless people because you guys buy cigarettes and beer or whatever. So that's also another factor that you have to consider with the type of business and the type of place it is. You also have to be able to identify when an agency is working outside the law, when they're not going to work clean. If you know that your police officers are breaking the law, the homeless people know the law, they know their rights, the police doesn't care. They're habitual right takers, and the homeless people know their rights. The cops know that the homeless people know their rights. They're just volunteering to work outside the confines of the law. There are agencies that have a good reputation with the homeless people. And then there's agencies that have a bad reputation with the homeless people. For example, Polk County and Charlotte County and Collier County don't have a bad repute with their homeless population. Meanwhile, Brevard County has a horrendous reputation with their homeless people. So you, the homeless person, also has to have a little bit of intelligence to determine what type of agency are you dealing with. If you're dealing with an agency that has a bad reputation, you know how they're going to come at you. They're not going to care about your rights. They're not going to care about the way they're going to escalate things, and they're going to arrest you and trump up charges. You already know how they're going to proceed, so that should give you an idea of how you're going to act. Every police officer in every agency isn't going to act the same way as well. You may have an agency where 90% of the cops are bad, but if that one cop that's good comes around, you don't want to be a jerk to him needlessly. You're homeless, you're out on the streets, you're talking to other homeless people, you're going to gather information about the agency, the specific police officers, the practices, the laws. You'll learn a little bit about the specifics about where you're living and the way things are happening there. For example, I currently live in Manatee County. I've talked to the homeless people left and right, even though I don't know, I've never dealt with law enforcement in this county, just from talking to the homeless people and the people in the neighborhoods, I've been able to figure out that in this county, if you're poor or you're homeless, law enforcement simply doesn't care about your needs. So if you call the cops and you live in that trailer park by 41, your call isn't important. The priority line is not for you. You're not at the top of the priority. So even though I don't live in this community too long, those are the specifics of the community that I'm in. So every county is going to have a different scenario and a different situation going on. For example, in Lee County, Florida, I lived there for a while. In that county, law enforcement simply doesn't pay attention to homeless people. In Sarasota County, the homeless people sit down on the floor in downtown until the police officers come and tell them to leave. For some reason, they like to push power on the law enforcement. In Sarasota, they're pushier with law enforcement. There's more of a conflict between law enforcement and the homeless people like to stretch their homeless arm and try to test the law. Then you have some counties that on social media, they'll post up pictures of them feeding the homeless, but in reality, they don't give a crap about the homeless. So you need to figure out what county are you in, what city, what county, what are the ordinances where you live, what are the police officers that are good, which ones are bad, what places you can and can't go to, and what are the general practices that are being enacted in that county. Brevard County, for example, I have heard some horrendous stories about how they go about their evictions. It's completely illegitimate. They don't care about the rights of the homeless people, so that may be a county that if you're in, you may encounter a lot of misappropriation. So you got to do your research, get familiar with your environment, and understand exactly what the procedures are happening. Unfortunately, there's communities like, for example, Brevard County, undoubtedly, where all the practices that they're doing are illegitimate. They're doing all of the worst. They're doing these homeless camp, and like take cities like Bradenton where I live. There was a lot of homeless camps here. Too many. Like, it's embarrassing. You go on Google Maps of Bradenton, and the amount of homeless camps that you see, it's disrespectful. It's too much. And now that the homeless camps are gone, there's 10 or I've seen 10 panhandlers at one intersection in Bradenton taking turns to panhandle because there's so many waiting in line to panhandle. That's not really the way any city wants to have a situation going on. So the flip side is are you encroaching on people's properties? Are you encroaching on people's businesses? Because you could also be encroaching on other people, which is the reason why law enforcement is encroaching on you. But now you're homeless. You obviously have to live somewhere. Perhaps it's an abandoned building that's beat up, and perhaps you can find an arrangement with a business where you look out. I don't know. You got to find something. There's like two categories of homeless people. You have the user, the addict, your regular homeless person. And then you have like that 1 in 10, which is elderly and disabled. And elderly and disabled or females sometimes get a pass, but the vast majority of homeless people really won't. So you fall into either one of those categories. I mean, most police officers do have great morals and great convictions, and they may be bad to most homeless people, but if they see an old lady that's disabled, they should have the moral conviction to say, I'm not going to treat her the way I treat the rest of them. But some people are textbook. Most police officers could be textbook. They're just going to do what they've been told by their superiors. But if you are the disabled, if you are the one who isn't an addict, you need to be very clear about that. Hey, I'm not an addict. You can drug test me right now. I'm on a disability. Here's my information from SSI. The real biggest problem that I see is people not making that distinction between the user, the addict, the lazy, and somebody with a disability that's elderly. And at some point, you have to understand, even if they're a criminal, there's times where somebody's a criminal, they're covered in tattoos from neck to toe. And even though this kid's a criminal, he broke a leg, he's got a fever, he's got an infection. And then you do have to get moral with the police officer. Say, hey, man, you have the right to scream at a police officer. Say, hey, man, can't you see that person's got a broken leg? Can't you see he's in a wheelchair? You're a piece of crap. You have your rights to talk as well. And if somebody needs to have some moral correction, Even if you're homeless, you can still morally impose yourself on somebody and say, hey man, let's say there's 6 or 7 of you guys and you're all getting evicted. We'll say, okay, we're 6 of us. We're all going to leave. But her, what are you going to do for her? She can't leave. She's in a wheelchair. You take her and you give her what she needs, and then we'll leave. Because sometimes they want to bunch in everybody. And I know for a fact that sometimes the dude with the tattoos and the guys that looks the scariest in that camp, he's the one protecting the elderly people from getting hurt, Unfortunately, law enforcement is never going to see those people as anything more than a criminal. And sometimes if you're homeless, you're disabled, you're stuck in the same camp as the criminals. You're all in the same situation together. So it sucks. It's a really horrible situation. And I hope that my video has brought you, the homeless people that are out there, some type of information that can be useful to you. I've seen situations where there's like 5 or 6 elderly females, and then they'll have one guy that's the one with the tattoos that protects them. So at the same time, you also need those people that are like that to protect you out there, because the law enforcement isn't going to do it. It's messed up, and I get angry. Like, I go to these homeless camps and I see situations that just infuriate me because they're injustices. But there's not much I can do other than just be a friend sometimes. Sometimes it's not about giving you money or giving you food. Sometimes it's just being a friend, showing you that you're still a human and that you can still be treated by a human by people like myself who remember that. But again, there's only so much I can do. It's also important for you to document that you're homeless, There's ways you can do that. You can send emails, like encourage everybody that's homeless in your city to send an email to the mayor's office. They're not going to reply, by the way. They don't reply, but they need to document that this is the population. When you do that, you can't be disrespectful. I know your situation's stressful, but when you send correspondence to officials, you can't be disrespectful. I know it's difficult. You're frustrated. You're angry. But if you have correspondence with public officials, the first thing you should try to do is document that you're homeless. Hey, my name is Larry. Here's my birthday. Here's how tall I am. I'm currently living outside of the health department of my city. Document with an email that you're homeless with the public officials. Your age, your health impairments, everything that you can throw at them to document that you're homeless. I've even thought about opening an app or something where we can just register homeless people into an app by county so that we can at least know the real numbers, know how many are, voluntarily you can say if you have a health impairment, how many are males, how many are female, the age, have some type of idea. And instead of being an invisible population, being more of a visible population, because if you're not on paper as homeless, man, you don't exist. The county that I live in Bradenton, Manatee County, says there's only 180 people in this county that are homeless. Guys, I'm going to document that I'm going to interview 400 homeless people just to show to them that there's more than what they're saying. You are an invisible population. They're underreporting the homeless population in Florida vastly. They don't want you to exist. So if they don't want you to exist, don't play into their game of making you invisible. Send an email to your mayor, to your council, saying, hey, my name is Larry. I'm this old. I've been homeless for this far. And say exactly where you're sleeping. I'm sleeping behind the health department with a broken leg or something. I'm at the veterans, whatever, let them know that you exist on document. You have to document it. They're not going to reply. But if 40, 50, 60, 100 people send them that email, then they have to know you exist somehow. They have to acknowledge it somehow. You can't perpetually, endlessly be an invisible person. You have to send an email and say, hey, I'm here. I'm this person. This is what I'm going through. Short, nice, to the point. Include things like dates, where you were living, your address previously to being homeless. Document that you exist. Because if you don't exist, they never have to have any provisions for you. And that's what they're trying to do. By underestimating these numbers, by not acknowledging that you exist, then they don't have to make any type of provisions for your existence. But if you make a presence that you're known, you exist, you're a number, you've been sending an email, they got an email saying, I got a broken leg, this is where I was living. Now you exist. And now you're somewhat of a liability to them in your existence. Become a liability to them. Say, hey, I currently have an infected foot. This could get worse. A month later, I lost my foot. Let them know that you're a liability. Your existence is a liability to them because otherwise they're never going to do anything about the situation. You guys saw what they were doing in Florida, where the one agency put the offenders in the Florida Department of Transportation land. They're pushing the responsibility from one agency to the next. They're just throwing you around. So, hey, throw yourself on them. Say, hey, this is your responsibility. It's not the police officers. It's not this. It's not you're the one responsible for fixing this problem. And remember, your battle as a homeless person isn't against law enforcement. It's against the ordinances that are coming from the cities and the counties. So you have to make yourself a liability to the cities and the counties first, not to the law enforcement agencies. They're not really where it's coming from. And get your crap together, because I've seen homeless people where we get them into an apartment, we get them into a vehicle, we get them a lawsuit, we get them back on their feet, and eventually they end up homeless again because they themselves are leading their life to destruction. And I've seen people where they're helped to get into an apartment, they mess that up, they get into a vehicle, they mess that up, they get some money, they blow through it. Next thing you know, even though they got a lawsuit, got some money, they're back on the streets because that's where their actions and their habits take them to. So you yourself are the one who's going to determine whether you're going to get off the streets or you're going to stay on the streets. And if your habits are bad, even if you get back off the streets, you'll end up on the streets. You know why? Because the things that you're doing are going to cause you to come back to that situation again. I've seen people get to Section 8, get the help, get the job, get their life back on track, and somewhere down the line, they commit a crime, go to jail, lose everything, get back on the streets because they themselves are forging their own path of destruction. And you don't want to do that to yourself. When I go into the homeless camps, 60 to 80% of these homeless camps have a lot of bottles in them. Hey man, you're on the streets. You shouldn't be drinking and partying. You should be 100% sober so you can plot your recovery and reentry to society. So if you're out there in the woods drinking all the time, you're not plotting your return to society. You're plotting your own demise. You're sitting there smoking something. Well, that's $300 a month. That's $1,000 in 3 months. If you stop doing that for 3 months, you got $1,000. That's a first month's rent. So a lot of times the only person holding you into that situation is nobody but yourself and your own bad decision and bad habits and lack of self-control. Nobody's going to have pity on you. Nobody's going to change your situation for you. I know there's people out there that have a health problem, they have mental illness, they're advanced in age and health, and they really don't have any other way out. But a lot of people that are homeless, man, they're doing it to themselves. And they're still young. It means if they got their crap together, they can change their life outcome. But if you stay 5, 6, 7 more years on those streets living the way you're living now, if you're still young and you're out on the streets, get your crap together now. Get off that crap now so you can get back on your feet, because eventually you're going to be old and out there, and then it's definitely going to be too late for anything to happen. And when you get to that point, not even public services want to help you, because at that point, you're a lost case, man. So unfortunately, that's the truth reality. I hope you guys enjoyed this video.